Millionaire pretended to go on a trip, but what he saw between the cleaner and his mother with Alzheimer's. The flight to London departs in 3 hours. I want no errors. Kunle Adeyemi buttoned the jacket of his dark suit in front of the mirror in the grand foyer. He did not look at his mother when he spoke, nor did he look at Amaka, the young employee in a light blue uniform, who stood silently a few steps from the empty wheelchair. The opulent Ikoyi mansion in Lagos was a monument to Kunle's success. White walls, armored glass, absolute silence. A sterile fortress designed to maintain control over everything, especially the disease that was devouring Mama Sade's mind. In her old age, Saad sat on the living room sofa, her gaze lost on an invisible spot on the wall. She wore a pale yellow blouse, perfectly ironed. Kunle paid an eye-watering sum weekly to a team of 3 specialists, a neurologist and a private dietitian, to ensure his mother lived exactly like this: clean, medicated, quiet, and safe. "Doctor, Okoro will be here at 5 to check her blood pressure," Kunle continued, adjusting the watch on his wrist. "The diet is on the kitchen whiteboard. Salt-free vegetable pap at 1 p.m., liquid supplement at 4 p.m. If Mama gets agitated, give her the blue pill. If she doesn't calm down, call emergency services." "Understood, Amaka?" "Yes, Mr. Adeyemi, everything is clear," the young woman replied, lowering her gaze. Kunle didn't trust her. Amaka had only been working in the house for a month after the last 3 high-level nurses resigned, complaining of Mama Sade's hostility. Amaka wasn't a certified nurse. She was just the night shift cleaner who had asked to cover extra daytime hours. Kunle accepted out of desperation, but something about the young woman's demeanor deeply bothered him. She was too gentle, too familiar. Sometimes he heard her humming softly while cleaning. In that house, there was no reason to sing. "I'm leaving. I'll be back on Friday." Kunle didn't approach to say goodbye to his mother. He knew Mama Sade wouldn't recognize him. For months, she had only seen him as a stranger in a suit, or worse, just another doctor. He closed the main door with a sharp thud that echoed throughout the ground floor. Outside, his chauffeur waited with the rear door of the black SUV open. "To the airport." "Mr. Adeyemi?" asked the driver. "No. Drive around the block, park in the service lane behind the property, and switch off the engine." The chauffeur looked at him in the rearview mirror, confused, but nodded without asking questions. In the back seat, Kunle took out his phone. He opened the CCTV app for the mansion, a black screen. He had deactivated them himself that morning. If he wanted to catch Amaka in an act of negligence, he couldn't let her see the red indicator light of the cameras blinking. He wanted her to feel free, unwatched, completely unburdened. He was convinced the young woman ignored the medical schedules. He had noticed small things in recent days. The blue pill, untouched in the dispenser. A cushion moved. The television tuned to an old high-life music channel, instead of the financial news he habitually left on. Someone was breaking the rules, altering the perfect and costly ecosystem he had designed to keep his mother alive. And Kunle Adeyemi did not allow anyone to break his rules. 60 minutes passed. The silence inside the SUV parked in the service lane was suffocating. Kunle checked the time: 1 p.m., the exact hour for the salt-free vegetable pap. "Wait for me here. Don't start the car until I tell you," Kunle ordered, opening the door stealthily. He walked towards the service door with his briefcase in hand, his leather shoes treading slowly to make no sound. He took out his master key. The lock turned with an almost imperceptible click. Kunle pushed the door and entered the laundry area. He was inside. The trap had closed. Now he just had to walk to the living room, catch the employee sleeping on the sofa or stealing some valuable item, fire her on the spot, and prove to himself once again that money and absolute control were the only real ways to care for someone. He advanced through the kitchen hallway. Everything was dark, the blinds closed to protect the furniture from the sun, but something stopped him dead before he reached the threshold. Kunle lifted his head. His nostrils flared. He frowned, unable to process what his senses were telling him. In his house, the air always smelled of clinical disinfectant, starched linens, and the prescribed aromatherapy diffusers. But now the air was thick. It smelled of hot oil, baked dough, and strong spices. It smelled of poison for his mother's arteries. Kunle's pulse quickened. Rage climbed his neck like a flame. Junk food. The cleaner had brought junk food into the house. The doctors had been extremely clear. Mama Sade's heart was weak. Her digestive system barely tolerated liquids. Excess sodium could trigger a fatal hypertensive crisis. That's why Kunle spent millions of naira a month on a dietitian who sent insipid, gram-measured meals. And this girl in a blue uniform had brought rubbish into his pristine sanctuary. He tightened his grip on his leather briefcase until his knuckles turned white. Firing her was no longer enough. He was going to sue her. He was going to ensure Amaka Eze never got another job in the entire city. Medical negligence was a crime, and he had the lawyers to destroy her. He continued down the main hallway that connected the kitchen to the large timber-paneled dining room. The smell of melted cheese and pepperoni grew more intense, almost offensive amidst the minimalist decor and abstract art. Suddenly, a sound broke the mansion's sepulchral silence. Kunle froze a meter from the dining room door. He held his breath. It was a voice, but it wasn't Amaka's apologizing or talking on the phone. It was laughter. A rich, booming, vibrant, and deep laugh. A laugh that chilled him to the bone, not from fear, but from utter disbelief. It had been exactly 5 years since his father's passing, and the brutal onset of Alzheimer's, that such laughter had not echoed through the walls of that house. It was his mother's laughter. Kunle took a step forward and peered through the dining room doorway, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. What he saw left him breathless, his mouth literally agape, paralyzed, as if he had crashed into a concrete wall at 100 kilometers per hour. Natural light streamed in through the immense garden windows, bathing the large solid oak table in a warm golden hue. There, in the center of the scene, sat Mama Saad. She wasn't stooped. Her gaze wasn't empty, nor her face gray and apathetic, as Kunle had seen it every morning for months. She sat upright in her chair with her glasses perfectly adjusted. Her yellow blouse seemed to glow. She was smiling with such pure, lucid happiness that she looked 10 years younger. Beside her, leaning over the table with protective warmth, was Amaka. The young woman wore her light blue uniform with white trim, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She didn't look like an employee breaking the rules. She looked like a guardian angel. On the table there was no vegetable pap, no syringes with supplements, no measuring cups. There were 2 enormous cardboard boxes. Amaka held a silver spatula. With a careful, loving motion, she was serving a gigantic slice of pepperoni pizza directly onto Mama Sade's fine porcelain plate. The melted cheese stretched into perfect, steaming strands under the sunlight. "Careful, my dear child. It's hot," Mama Sade said, laughing and rubbing her hands in anticipation, like a little girl waiting for a gift. She was speaking. Mama Sade, who had been muttering incomprehensible syllables for weeks, had just formed a complete sentence with meaning and emotion. "Blow on it a little, Mama," Amaka replied sweetly, placing the plate in front of her. "Just how Baba Segun liked it, right? With lots of cheese and crispy edges." Kunle felt a direct blow to his stomach, hearing his father's name. "Exactly so," Mama Sade sighed, closing her eyes for a second as the aroma enveloped her. "On Fridays, we always ordered this on Friday nights when the children were small. Kunle used to eat all the pepperoni before the pizza even reached the table. What a mischievous boy he was." The millionaire recoiled half a step in the hallway's darkness, feeling short of breath. He dropped his briefcase. The leather object fell to the marble floor with a dull thud, but the 2 women in the dining room were so absorbed in their moment of happiness that neither noticed the sound. Kunle stood there, trapped in the doorway. He was going to burst in shouting. He was going to invoke the cardiologist's warnings. He was going to talk about sodium, cholesterol, million-naira lawsuits, and instant dismissal. But he couldn't move. In front of him was no criminal negligence. In front of him was his mother, brought back to life by a piece of dough and cheese, remembering a past that Kunle believed Alzheimer's had erased forever. He had spent millions on medicines to keep her heart beating in a state of permanent sadness. Amaka, with a simple hidden pizza and a kind conversation, had given her back her soul. The businessman in the dark suit, the man who controlled hundreds of employees and managed 9-figure accounts, realized, at that instant, that he knew absolutely nothing about how to love his own mother. And as he watched Mama Sade take the first bite and close her eyes in absolute delight, Kunle Adeyemi knew that the trap he had set to destroy the cleaner had just closed around his own throat. The forgotten smile. The Italian leather briefcase lay abandoned on the marble floor. Kunle Adeyemi, the man who would not hesitate to liquidate entire companies with a single signature, the ice-cold negotiator who never showed weakness in board meetings, was completely petrified in front of the doorway of his own dining room. He couldn't take a step forward, he couldn't step back. His brain, trained to process data, risks, and protocols, was experiencing a monumental short circuit. There was his mother, Mama Said, the same woman who that very morning seemed like an empty shell, a gray-haired ghost, who could barely keep her gaze fixed on the wall. The same woman whom Dr. Okoro, charging exorbitant fees, had diagnosed with irreversible cognitive decline and severe hostility. But the woman Kunle was seeing now, bathed in the golden light from the window, was not a ghost. She was alive, terribly alive. Her hands, which usually trembled when holding sterilized plastic cups with vitamin supplements, now firmly held the edge of the pizza slice. Melted cheese lightly stained her fingers, but she didn't care. She chewed with astonishing vitality, savoring each bite as if it were the most exquisite delicacy on the planet, closing her eyes with a gesture of absolute pleasure that erased 10 years of wrinkles from her face. "It's delicious, my child, delicious," Mama Sade murmured, mouth half full, letting out a mischievous little chuckle that drove an invisible stake into Kunle's chest. He hadn't heard that laugh in years. Since Alzheimer's began to steal her words, memories, and dignity, Mama Sade had become a perpetual patient. Kunle, in his desperation not to lose her, had turned the house into a luxury hospital. He had banished salt, sugar, fats, loud music, unexpected visitors, and anything that could upset her fragile nervous system. He had built a perfect glass cage, and now a minimum wage cleaner had just shattered that cage with a simple, greasy cardboard box. Amaka, sitting beside her, took a common paper napkin, not the sterilized, hypoallergenic wipes the doctors demanded, and gently wiped the corner of the elderly woman's lips. "Eat slowly, Mama Sade. There's enough for both of us." "No one will rush us today," Amaka said in a voice so soft and warm that it violently contrasted with the cold, calculated orders Kunle usually gave in that very house. The businessman felt his blood boil, but no longer from anger. It was from shame, a deep, corrosive, and crushing shame. In his mind, the medical team's warnings echoed like air raid sirens. "Sodium will raise her blood pressure, Mr. Adeyemi. Saturated fat is an imminent risk of heart attack. You must maintain a bland, strict diet, without variations. If she gets agitated, give her the blue pill." Kunle had followed these instructions with religious devotion. He believed that by paying the best specialists and buying the most expensive medicines imported from Europe, he was being the best son in the world. He believed that his money was an infallible shield against death. But seeing his mother smile, seeing the moist, lucid sparkle in her brown eyes as she looked at Amaka, Kunle understood the brutal and terrifying truth. He wasn't saving her. He was killing her with sadness. The salt-free vegetable pap wasn't prolonging her life. It was only prolonging her agony. The blue pills that kept her sedated all day weren't for Mama Sade's well-being. They were for the convenience of the nurses who didn't want to deal with her frustration. Amaka poured some fresh water into a normal glass. Mama Sade drank with relish and then let out a long sigh, leaning back in the chair. She seemed relaxed. She seemed at peace. Kunle leaned against the cold hallway wall, hidden in the shadows. The lump in his throat was so big he could barely breathe. He was about to witness something that would finally shatter the iron shell he had built around himself for years. The atmosphere in the dining room was about to change, and the millionaire businessman was completely helpless before what was to come. The dialogue that broke the businessman. The afternoon sun began to descend, lengthening the shadows in the grand oak dining room. Mama Sade left the pizza crust on the porcelain plate. She sighed deeply with a serene smile on her face. Amaka began to collect the used napkins with slow, calm movements, without interrupting the peace of the moment. "It's good you came today," Mama Sade whispered suddenly. Her voice no longer had its previous strength. Now it sounded fragile, distant, loaded with heavy nostalgia. Amaka stopped, placed the napkins on the table, and looked the elderly woman in the eyes. "I love being here with you," the young caregiver replied, maintaining a soft, comforting tone. Mama Sade raised a trembling hand. Her fingers, marked by age spots and IV lines, sought Amaka's hand on the tablecloth. The young woman did not pull away. On the contrary, she enveloped the elderly woman's hand in hers, offering warmth. The silence in the house was absolute. Kunle, hidden a few meters away in the dark hallway, clenched his fists against the wall. His pulse pounded in his temples with painful force. "I was so afraid you wouldn't come," Mama Sade continued, and suddenly her eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of physical pain, but of a soul wound that Alzheimer's had not managed to erase. "I knew today was your day off from university, but I was afraid you'd prefer to go out with your friends instead of coming to see this boring old woman." Amaka swallowed. Her back tensed imperceptibly. Kunle, from the darkness, frowned, confused. "University?" Amaka didn't go to university. She had barely finished public secondary school before starting to clean offices and homes. "I would never be too busy for you," Amaka said, her voice trembling for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. Mama Sada squeezed the young woman's hand harder. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek, shining in the golden sunlight. "I missed you so much, Moremi." The name dropped into the dining room like a ton-weight bomb. In the hallway, Kunle stopped breathing. His knees buckled. He had to lean his full weight against the marble wall to keep from collapsing to the floor. He brought both hands to his mouth to stifle a cry of pure pain that threatened to tear his throat. Moremi. Moremi was his younger sister. She had died in a car accident 22 years ago, when she was barely a university student. Moremi's death had destroyed the Adeyemi family, had extinguished the light in Mama Sade's eyes, and had turned Kunle into the work-addicted, cold, and control-obsessed man he was today. The strict rules of Mama Sade's neurologists dictated an unbreakable protocol for such cases: reality orientation therapy. The doctors had been emphatic with Kunle and all household staff. If Mama Sade mentioned Moremi, they were to correct her immediately. They were to tell her, looking her in the eyes, that Moremi was dead, that she had passed away decades ago, that the current year was TIs, and that she was suffering from confusion. Kunle had seen the nurses do it. He had seen how, when applying that cursed medical protocol, his mother's eyes filled with pure terror. He had seen Mama Sade relive the heartbreaking pain of losing her daughter for the first time, again and again, crying out, beating her chest, until despair forced the doctors to inject a strong sedative to silence her. That was the correct medical procedure. That was what his money paid for. From the shadows, his eyes filled with burning tears, Kunle watched Amaka. He expected the cleaner to do as she had been ordered. He expected her to break the spell, to tell the elderly woman she was confused, that she wasn't Moremi, that Moremi was in a cemetery. But Amaka Eze was not a cold doctor. She was a woman with an immense heart who understood compassion far better than any white-coated specialist. Amaka looked into the elderly woman's pleading eyes. She saw the terror appearing in Mama Sade's gaze, the terrifying fear of loneliness, the fear of losing her daughter again. The young cleaner did not hesitate. She lowered her head, moved her chair closer, and stroked the woman's gray hair with infinite tenderness. "I missed you so much too, Mama," Amaka said, her voice broken with emotion, accepting the role, sacrificing clinical truth to protect the elderly woman's shattered heart. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Mama Sade closed her eyes and let out a monumental sob of relief. She brought Amaka's hand to her face and kissed it. "Oh, my beautiful child, my precious child," Mama Sade cried, smiling through tears, releasing years of accumulated anguish. "Promise me you won't leave. Promise me you'll stay for dinner. Your father will be home soon from work, and your brother too." At the mention of Kunle, Mama Sade's voice changed. It became heavier, laden with a deep concern that cut the air. "Kunle works too much, Moremi," Mama Sade whispered, looking at Amaka intently, as if entrusting her greatest secret. "He thinks I don't notice. He thinks that because I'm sick, I don't see things. But I do. I see him so tired, so lonely. His heart is locked, just like his father's. It pains my soul to see him like this. He buys all these medicines, brings all these strange people into the house, because he's terrified of being alone. He thinks money can buy him time. But money doesn't hug, my child. Money doesn't say good morning." In the darkness of the hallway, the iron wall Kunle Adeyemi had built for 20 years completely collapsed. The tears he never allowed anyone to see, the tears he didn't shed even at his father's funeral, began to fall uncontrollably down his face. He bit his lower lip so hard he tasted blood, desperately trying to stifle the sobs that shook his chest. There he was, the great millionaire, the business genius who believed he had the world at his feet, hidden like a thief in his own home, listening as his mother, her brain ravaged by Alzheimer's, understood his own misery and loneliness much better than he ever had. Mama Sade wasn't crazy. Mama Sade was trapped, and he was her jailer. "He has a good heart, Mama," Amaka replied, wiping her own tears with the back of her free hand, defending the very man who had treated her with icy contempt that morning. "Mr. Kunle loves you. Only sometimes people forget how to show it. Sometimes fear makes us act unlike ourselves. I know, Moremi, I know." Mama Sade sighed, closing her eyes heavily, suddenly exhausted by the emotional deluge. The effect of Alzheimer's again clouded her mind like a receding tide. "Help him, my child. Don't leave him alone. Promise me. I promise, Mama. I promise, Amaka whispered, kissing the elderly woman's forehead. Kunle couldn't bear it a second longer. The pain in his chest was physical, an unbearable pressure that threatened to suffocate him. He wanted to rush into the dining room. He wanted to fall to his knees in front of the wheelchair, hug his mother, ask her forgiveness for the years of coldness, for the sedative pills, for having treated her as a patient instead of a mother. He wanted to thank that young cleaner for giving Mama Saad the most beautiful moment of peace in almost half a decade. He wiped his tears with the sleeve of his expensive designer suit, ruining the silk fabric. He took a shaky breath to steady himself. He was going to step out of the shadows. He was going to change everything. He was going to fire the doctors and hire Amaka full-time. He was going to be a real son. But destiny and wounded pride have a cruel way of manifesting when one has lived too long in darkness. As he took his first step forward, determined to enter the sun-drenched dining room, Kunle's right foot accidentally struck the leather briefcase he had dropped minutes earlier. The clang of the heavy metal clasps against the marble floor resonated throughout the house like a gunshot. In the dining room, the magic shattered in a fraction of a second. Amaka let go of Mama Sade's hand and jumped to her feet, pale as a sheet. Her heart gave a wild lurch in her chest. She knew that sound. She knew someone was in the hallway. She knew she had been discovered breaking each and every one of the house rules. Mama Sade's eyes snapped open, startled by the sudden noise, confusion seizing her face once more. The veil of Alzheimer's fell over her suddenly. The peace vanished. Moremi's face disappeared from her mind, and before her stood only a frightened young woman in a blue uniform. Kunle remained petrified in the doorway, his face still red from crying, his eyes fixed on the impending disaster. The opportunity for redemption had slammed shut, and now the confrontation he had so carefully planned was about to erupt in the worst possible way. The relentless confrontation. The echo of the heavy metal clasps, striking the marble floor, shattered the dining room's atmosphere like a hammer blow against a crystal mirror. In a fraction of a second, the warm bubble of memories and love Amaka had built for Mama Sade completely burst. The young caregiver, her face suddenly pale, jumped to her feet. Panic choked her throat as she turned to the dark hallway and saw Kunle Adeyemi's imposing figure outlined in the doorway. Her hand trembled so violently that the porcelain plate she held slipped from her fingers. The plate shattered against the floor with a deafening crash. Pizza remnants and cheese scattered across the immaculate dining room timber floor. Mama Sade let out a gasp. The sudden noise, the electric tension that had just invaded the room, and the employee's terrified expression acted like a fulminant poison on the elderly woman's fragile brain. The fog of Alzheimer's, which had miraculously dissipated for the past 20 minutes, fell over her suddenly with brutal force. Mama Sade's eyes began to dart frantically around the room. She no longer saw Moremi, her lost daughter. She no longer remembered her husband or Friday pizzas. Her breathing became ragged. Before her stood only an unknown girl, trembling with fear, and a man in a dark suit with a distorted face advancing towards them like a storm. Kunle Adeyemi crossed the threshold and stepped into the dining room's light. Seconds earlier, in the darkness of the hallway, he was a broken son, weeping tears of regret. But upon being discovered, upon seeing the vulnerability exposed on the employee's face, Kunle's oldest and most destructive defense mechanism automatically activated. His iron pride could not bear to feel weak. He could not allow the night shift cleaner to see him with reddened eyes and a shattered soul. So he did the only thing he knew how to do when he lost control of a situation: attack. He clenched his fists, tightened his jaw, and let fury, a fury born of his own shame, completely dominate him. "What in God's name is going on here?" Kunle roared. His deep, authoritative voice made the immense windows rattle. Amaka recoiled a step, unknowingly treading on broken porcelain. Her brown eyes were wide, filled with tears of pure terror. She knew perfectly well who the man in front of her was. Kunle Adeyemi was not just her boss. He was one of Lagos's most ruthless and vengeful businessmen, a man capable of destroying a person's life with a single phone call. "Mr. Adeyemi, I can explain, please," Amaka stammered, her voice broken, wringing her trembling hands at chest height. "I just wanted—" "Shut up!" Kunle interrupted her, taking 2 quick strides until he was less than a meter from her. His presence was suffocating, a wall of power and aggression. "I asked you a direct question, Amaka. What is this rubbish doing on my mother's table? Are you stupid, or did you just decide to ignore the medical orders I gave you barely 2 hours ago?" He pointed an accusing finger at the greasy cardboard boxes resting on the imported tablecloth. The image contrasted so violently with the house's clinical perfection that it seemed a direct insult to his authority. "Sir, please listen to me, I beg you," Amaka pleaded, warm tears rolling down her cheeks. Mama Said hadn't swallowed the vegetable pap for 3 full days. Every time I tried to give her the supplements, she spat them out and cried. She was losing weight. She was losing the light in her eyes. The doctors only wanted to sedate her. But she doesn't need sedatives, sir. She was hungry. Hungry for something real. Hungry for a memory. The truth in Amaka's words hit Kunle in the chest like a sledgehammer, because he himself, hidden in the shadows minutes earlier, had confirmed that the young woman was right. He had seen his mother smile as she hadn't in years. He had heard the lucidity in her voice, but Kunle's wounded ego was an indomitable monster. Admitting that the cleaner was right meant admitting that he, with all his millions, had failed utterly. It meant accepting that he had tortured his own mother for months under the false shield of medical science, and he was not willing to break down in front of a service employee. Hungry for a memory? Kunle scoffed, letting out a cold, dry laugh devoid of all humanity. A laugh that chilled Amaka's blood. Since when are you a neurologist? Since when does your public school certificate give you the right to diagnose my mother and decide what's best for her? You're the cleaning lady. Mama Sade, huddled in her wheelchair, began to sob silently. She brought her wrinkled hands to her ears, trying to block the shouting. The violence in her son's voice caused her deep terror, although her ailing mind could no longer comprehend why they were fighting. You're playing with her life! Kunle continued shouting, moving even closer to Amaka, backing her against the edge of the oak table. The cardiologist was perfectly clear. An alteration in her sodium levels could cause a fulminant heart attack. What did you want, Amaka? To kill her so you wouldn't have to wipe her drool in the afternoons? Is that it? The accusation was so cruel, so absolutely perverse and unjust, that Amaka felt short of breath. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but only a choked sob came from her throat. The pain of being accused of wanting to murder the woman she had just embraced with her whole soul was too much. No, no, for God's sake, no! Amaka cried, shaking her head desperately, looking at Mama Sade, who trembled with fear. I love her. I just wanted to see her happy for a moment. She called me her daughter's name, Mr. Adeyemi. She asked me not to leave her alone. She was at peace. She was completely at peace. Kunle's face contorted into a grimace of pure agony, disguised as rage. Hearing Amaka mention Moremi was the last straw. His breathing became heavy, almost erratic. Guilt was devouring him alive inside, but on the outside, he transformed into a machine of destruction. My sister is dead, Kunle roared, hitting the oak table with a clenched fist. The thud made the water glasses jump. She's been dead for 22 years. Playing along with my mother's hallucinations is grave medical negligence. You're pushing her deeper into her dementia. You're destroying the protocol. I pay thousands of naira to maintain. Kunle thrust his trembling hand into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out his latest model cell phone. The screen illuminated his distorted face. It's over, he stated in a voice now dangerously low, a venomous whisper that promised the end of the world for the young woman. Gather your things. You're fired. And pray that tonight I don't send my lawyers to the police station to press formal charges for attempted homicide, for medical negligence. I will ensure, Amaka Eze, that you never get another bloody job in this entire state. I will crush you. Amaka felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Absolute terror paralyzed her. If they sued her, if they tainted her name with a criminal record, she wouldn't just lose this job. She would lose the ability to support her own younger siblings. She would fall into absolute destitution. She fell to her knees amidst the pizza remnants and broken glass, not caring that a sharp piece of porcelain slightly cut the fabric of her trousers at the shin. Mr. Adeyemi, I beg you, for God's sake! Amaka cried from the floor, clasping her hands in a gesture of desperate plea, completely humiliating herself before the millionaire's crushing power. Fire me. Don't pay me this month if you want, but please don't sue me. I have a family that depends on me. I have 2 younger siblings who eat from my wages. I swear to God that my only intention was to give your mother love, a love that in this house, Amaka bit her tongue just in time. She was about to say a love that in this house no one gives her. But Kunle perfectly understood the unfinished sentence, and his eyes became bloodshot. He was about to raise his voice again. He was going to destroy her with the worst threat his brilliant and twisted mind could formulate. But then the impossible happened. A sharp, metallic screech cut the tension in the dining room. It was the sound of Mama Said's wheelchair wheels sliding abruptly against the timber floor. Kunle stopped dead, phone still in hand. He looked down, confused. Amaka also stopped crying for a fraction of a second, lifting her tear-soaked face. Mama Sade, the fragile woman, medicated into lethargy, diagnosed with severe muscle weakness that prevented her from walking more than 2 meters without assistance, was clinging to the armrests of her chair with both hands. Her knuckles were white from the colossal effort she was making. Her face, deeply furrowed with wrinkles, was contorted in a grimace of evident physical pain. Her knees visibly trembled beneath her soft fabric trousers, threatening to give way at any moment under the weight of her own body. "Mama, what are you doing?" Kunle murmured, suddenly alarmed, forgetting for a second his role as executioner. "No, don't get up, you'll fall." The doctors said that, but Mama Sade didn't listen to him. Or perhaps she did hear him, but decided that the voice of that man in the dark suit had no authority over her. With a muffled groan of effort, ignoring the creaking of her joints stiffened by forced inactivity and medication, Mama Sade stood up. Her body swayed dangerously forward. Kunle dropped the phone, which hit the floor with a dry thud, and made to run to support her, terrified that his mother would fracture her hip. "Don't you dare touch me." Mama Sade's cry was like a whip. It wasn't a confused babble. It wasn't the lament of an Alzheimer's patient. It was the firm, authoritative, and protective voice of the matriarch she once had been, forcing its way through the dense fog of her crumbling brain. Kunle froze midway, his hands extended in the air, his eyes wide with shock. Mama Sade breathed with difficulty. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but she did not sit back down. With short, dragging, agonizing steps, navigating around the broken porcelain pieces, she walked slowly until she positioned herself right between the enraged businessman and the young employee who was still kneeling on the floor. Mama Sade, in her pale yellow blouse and stooped shoulders, stood before her millionaire son. She was a human shield, a fragile, trembling, sacred glass shield, ready to break before allowing anyone to hurt the girl who had given her life back. "Mama Sade, no, please, sit down, you're hurting yourself," Amaka pleaded from the floor, extending a hand to gently touch the elderly woman's ankle, terrified by the consequences of such physical exertion. Mama Sade ignored Amaka. Her gaze, unusually sharp and full of fire, was fixed directly on Kunle's eyes. The millionaire felt himself shrink under the weight of that look. It had been years since his mother had looked him in the eyes with such intensity. She wasn't looking at him with the emptiness of dementia. She was looking at him with disappointment. "You will not shout at her," Mama Sade said. Her voice trembled from lack of air, but each word was pronounced with chilling clarity. "In this house, we do not shout at people who have good hearts." Kunle swallowed, feeling an invisible fist squeeze his esophagus. "Mama, please, are you confused?" Kunle tried to argue, using his condescending tone, the same one he used when Mama Sade had nervous breakdowns. "This woman is hurting you. She broke medical rules. She gave you food that could kill you. I'm trying to protect you. You have to go back to your chair. You'll get hurt." "Lies." Mama Sade cut him off, raising a trembling hand and pointing directly at her son's chest. "You don't protect me. You have me locked up." The silence that followed that declaration was absolute. It seemed as if the very air had been sucked out of the immense house. Mama Sade began to gasp. Exhaustion threatened to collapse her, but her maternal instinct, triggered by the young woman's crying behind her, burned stronger than any neurological disease. Her mind was shattered. She didn't know what day it was. She couldn't remember what she had eaten for breakfast, and at times she forgot that her daughter Moremi was dead. But primary emotions, love, fear, injustice, and loneliness remained intact at the core of her being. "I don't know your name," Mama Sade whispered, looking at Kunle with a painful confusion that tore the businessman's soul into 1,000 pieces. "Sometimes I know you're my son. Other times I just see a cruel man who wears black and comes into my house to give me orders and make me swallow pills that take away my sleep." Kunle felt the ground open beneath his Italian shoes. His own body began to tremble. The powerful, untouchable man was being completely annihilated by the fragile words of his sick mother. I am Kunle, Mama. I am your son. I do all this for you. I pay for everything so you can live," he stammered, tears welling up in his eyes again, his armor irrevocably cracking. "Then if you are my son, why do you leave me so alone?" Mama Sade asked. The question held no malice, only an innocent, deep pain. "Why do you let those men in white coats tie me to the bed when I'm scared? Why do you hide my memories?" Mama Sade paused, gasping for air, then pointed weakly backward, towards the girl who was still kneeling, crying in silence. She's the only one who looks me in the eye," the elderly woman continued, her voice breaking Kunle's last defense. "She's the only one who doesn't treat me like broken furniture. She gave me something to eat that tasted like home. She made me remember that I was once happy, and you come in screaming like a monster, wanting to destroy her. Mama Sade took a small step forward, closing the distance with her son, challenging all his power, all his money, and all his wounded pride. And you throw this good girl out onto the street, Mama Sade concluded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then promise me you'll open the door for me too, because I'd rather die of hunger in the street with someone who hugs me than continue living 100 years in this glass prison with you. Mama Sade's body could no longer resist. The adrenaline of the confrontation abruptly ran out like a match extinguishing in water. Her knees finally gave way, buckling under her own weight. "Mama!" Kunle cried, reacting instinctively, lunging forward to catch her before her head hit the marble floor. But Amaka was faster. With an agility born of pure devotion, she jumped up, ignoring the cut on her own leg, and embraced Mama Sade's collapsing body, cushioning her fall. The two women ended up on the floor, surrounded by pizza remnants and broken glass. Mama Sade had closed her eyes. The great physical effort had left her unconscious. Amaka held the elderly woman's head in her lap, stroking her forehead, weeping inconsolably, while murmuring prayers in a low voice. Kunle stood before them, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides. He had just heard the most brutal condemnation of his entire life, delivered by the lips of the only person for whom he would have given his life. The great millionaire's pride had been crushed. But instead of accepting the lesson, instead of kneeling beside Amaka to help his mother, the terror of having seen himself reflected as a monster pushed him to commit the biggest, darkest, and most unforgivable mistake of his entire existence. The unforgivable mistake. Mama Sade's unconscious body weighed like lead on Amaka's legs. The young caregiver, kneeling on the broken porcelain fragments, embraced the elderly woman's shoulders with absolute desperation. She wept silently, gently rocking her, staining her blue uniform with the cold sweat that beaded Mama Sade's forehead. Kunle Adeyemi, the man who feared no financial rival, was paralyzed by terror. The echo of his mother's last words still bounced off the immense dining room walls, drilling into his skull. "I'd rather die in the street than continue living in this prison with you." Humiliation burned in his veins. The pain of being rejected in such a way, in front of a mere employee, activated a poisonous and destructive defense mechanism within him. Instead of yielding to the truth, Kunle clung to blind fury. His face hardened like the marble he stood on. He advanced with heavy, violent steps towards the two women. "Let go of her," Kunle roared, bending down sharply and pushing Amaka away with a brutal shove. The young woman lost her balance and fell backward, cutting the palm of her hand on a fragment of the broken plate. A trickle of blood began to flow, mixing with the pizza grease scattered on the floor. But Kunle didn't care. He only cared about regaining control. "Don't touch her like that, sir. She's unconscious," Amaka cried, pressing her injured hand against her chest, terrified by the millionaire's roughness as he handled his mother's fragile body. "I told you to shut up," Kunle bellowed, lifting Mama Sade into his arms with superhuman effort. The elderly woman's head hung limply backward. Her breathing was a weak, choked wheeze. "You caused this. You broke her diet. You disturbed her mind with your absurd games. You pushed her to her limits. She only wanted love. She wanted to feel alive." Amaka cried from the floor, trembling from head to toe, unable to contain the helplessness that tore at her throat. "You don't understand anything. Don't you see she's dying of sadness?" Kunle stopped dead. The muscles of his jaw tensed until they almost broke. He looked at Amaka with a contempt so dark, so absolute, that the young woman felt the air freeze around her. "No, you're the one who doesn't understand," Kunle hissed in a low, icy voice that was more frightening than his shouts. "You're an intruder, an ignorant girl who came to dirty my house and endanger my mother's life for a stupid whim of cheap kindness." He cradled Mama Sade against his chest and gave Amaka the look of an executioner pronouncing judgment. "Get out of my house, right now." The entire world collapsed onto Amaka's shoulders. "Mr. Adeyemi, please," the young woman pleaded, struggling to her feet, ignoring the burning in her hand and cut leg. "I beg you, for God's sake. Fire me if you want, but please don't withhold my wages. I've been working double shifts for a month. My younger siblings are waiting for me. Our room rent is due tomorrow. If I don't bring that money, we'll be thrown onto the street." A distant rumble of thunder echoed. The Lagos sky, which minutes earlier had shone with the afternoon sun, had covered itself with heavy black clouds. The storm was about to break. Kunle didn't blink. Empathy had been completely devoured by his wounded pride. "Your wages?" Kunle scoffed, letting out a bitter laugh devoid of all humanity. "You should thank God I'm not calling the police right now to have you arrested for criminal negligence and harming an elderly adult. You want money? Sue me. and see how long your legal aid lawyer lasts against my law firm." Amaka opened her mouth, but no words came out. The level of cruelty of that man left her breathless. She understood at that instant that there was nothing human to appeal to. She was facing a money-making machine, an empty man who had replaced his heart with a safe. "I'm not paying you a single kobo," Kunle stated, turning on his heel to leave the dining room. "You have 5 minutes to collect your rubbish from the staff quarters and get out. If you're still here when I come down, the security guards at the gate will drag you out." Kunle walked away down the hallway, carrying Mama Sade in his arms, disappearing into the darkness of the main staircase. Amaka was left alone amidst the disaster. The silence that followed was sepulchral, oppressive, broken only by the first furious drumming of rain against the immense glass windows. She didn't collect her things. She had nothing of value in that staff quarters. Anyway, with tears blinding her vision, her hand bleeding, and her soul shattered, she shuffled towards the back door. She stepped into the service lane just as the sky opened up completely. The freezing rain soaked her in seconds. Amaka walked aimlessly in the storm, shivering with cold and fear, not knowing how she would look her younger siblings in the eyes that night to tell them there would be no food. Inside the mansion, Kunle laid his mother down on the immense hospital bed that dominated her luxurious room. He took her pulse. It was weak, but stable. He covered her with thermal blankets and closed the opaque curtains, plunging the room into perpetual gloom. He descended the stairs slowly. The sound of his own footsteps was unbearable. He reached the dining room. The ruined pizza was still there, scattered on the floor, along with the broken glass and Amaka's bloodstains. The smell of cheese and pepperoni still lingered in the air, refusing to disappear, reminding him with every breath of the exact moment his mother had been happy. Kunle stood in front of the rain-beaten window. He had won. He had defended his territory, asserted his authority, and expelled the threat. The medical protocol was safe again, but as he gazed into the darkness of the garden through the armored glass, the millionaire felt a void so deep in his stomach that it made him nauseous. The entire house felt like a gigantic, silent tomb. His victory had the bitter taste of ashes. The collapse. The next morning dawned without sun. The sky remained stained a leaden gray, and the Adeyemi mansion was plunged into an atmosphere of maximum clinical tension. It was 8 o'clock. Dr. Okoro, a neurologist in tailored suits and a briefcase full of latest generation sedatives, stood by Mama Sade's bed. Beside him, 2 robust nurses in impeccable white uniforms awaited orders. Kunle observed the scene from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't slept a wink. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the psychological war he had waged all night in the solitude of his study. "Her vital signs are disturbed, Mr. Adeyemi, doctor," Okoro reported, adjusting his glasses coldly. "Yesterday's crisis raised her blood pressure to dangerous levels. The event has pushed her into a phase of acute aggressive disorientation. I had already warned you. Any stimulus outside the norm, any alteration in her sterile routine, would cause a massive regression in her condition." The doctor spoke of Mama Sade as if she were a broken engine, not a human being. Kunle swallowed, feeling a sudden aversion to that monotonous, dispassionate tone, a tone he himself had demanded and applauded for years. In the center of the room, on the white sheets, Mama Sade was living an absolute hell. She wasn't catatonic like in previous weeks. She was terrified. Her eyes, bloodshot with panic, darted from one corner of the room to another. She breathed with short, desperate gasps. Her hands were clenched into fists so tight that her nails dug into her palms. "No, get away! Stay away from me!" Mama Sade cried in a raspy voice that broke with effort. One of the nurses tried to approach her with a metal tray containing a plastic cup of thick vegetable pap and a syringe with her morning medication. "Mama Sade, please, you need to eat breakfast." "Open your mouth," the nurse ordered, bringing the spoon closer with a mechanical movement devoid of any warmth. Mama Sade let out a shriek of desperation. With a quick, unexpected movement, she raised her arm and struck the tray with all her might. The green pap, plastic cups, and medicines flew through the air, crashing against the silk-lined wall and staining the immaculate floor. "I don't want your poison," Mama Sade cried, recoiling until she hit the headboard, hugging her knees, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "I want my child! I want Moremi! Bring my child!" The name cut through the room's air. Kunle felt an ice needle pierce his heart. "Mama, Moremi isn't here." "You know Moremi passed away, doctor," Okoro said, applying the cruel reality orientation therapy with the same naturalness with which he would tell the time. The effect was devastating. Mama Sade brought her hands to her head, pulling at her gray hair, and let out a heartbreaking scream, a primal lament full of agony that chilled everyone in the room to the bone. Reliving her daughter's death again in that state of absolute vulnerability completely destroyed her. "No, it's a lie! She was here yesterday. She fed me. She hugged me!" Mama Sade cried inconsolably, her face soaked with tears, frantically searching among the shadows of the room for the figure of the young woman in the blue uniform. "Moremi, you promised me you wouldn't leave. Don't leave me alone with these monsters." Kunle leaned against the doorframe. His legs failed him. The image of his mother begging for Amaka's presence was an unbearable torture. "Don't leave me alone with these monsters," she had said. And Kunle knew perfectly well that he was the leader of those monsters. "Restrain her," Dr. Okoro ordered in a flat voice, losing patience. He opened his black leather briefcase and took out a pre-filled syringe with a clear liquid. "The nervous agitation is escalating. I'm going to administer 5 milligrams of haloperidol. That will keep her sedated for the next 14 hours. The 2 robust nurses advanced towards the bed without hesitation. Each grabbed Mama Sade by an arm. The elderly woman struggled with the strength of desperation. "Let go of me, you're hurting me. Kunle, my son, help me." Mama Sade cried, searching for her son's eyes in the doorway, asking for help for the first time in years. Kunle watched the scene in slow motion. He saw the nurse's rough hands squeezing his mother's fragile forearms, leaving red marks on her paper-thin skin. He saw the sharp needle in Dr. Okoro's hand, glinting under the clinical fluorescent lights, ready to shut down the brain of the woman who had given him life. And suddenly, like lightning, the image from the previous afternoon flashed through his mind. He saw Amaka's hands, soft and warm, holding Mama Sade's trembling hand. He saw the young caregiver's smile. He saw the steaming slice of pizza. He heard his mother's vibrant laughter. He remembered Amaka's sweet voice, saying, "I would never be too busy for you." Amaka had given her life. Dr. Okoro was about to inject her with a living death. Dr. Okoro raised the syringe, removed the protective cap from the needle with his teeth, and approached the exposed shoulder of the elderly woman who was twisting in terror. "This will be quick, Mama Sade." "Stop struggling," the doctor murmured. But the needle never touched the skin. A firm hand, violent and trembling with pure rage, grabbed Dr. Okoro's wrist in midair, stopping him dead. The doctor turned his head in surprise. The nurses froze. It was Kunle, the businessman. His eyes were bloodshot, the veins in his neck bulging with tension, and his face contorted by a protective fury he had never felt before. "Let go of her this bloody instant," Kunle said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, guttural growl, laden with a death threat so real that Dr. Okoro instinctively dropped the syringe. The syringe fell to the floor and rolled under the bed. "I said, let her go," Kunle roared, brutally pushing the 2 nurses, forcing them to stumble backward. Mama Sade, freed, curled into a ball in the center of the bed, crying, terrified, hugging herself. "Mr. Adeyemi, what are you doing?" "Doctor," Okoro protested, rubbing his injured wrist, indignant at the lack of respect. "The protocol requires immediate sedation in an aggressive state. It's for her own good." Kunle looked him up and down with infinite disgust. For the first time in years, he saw reality without the filter of his millionaire pride, the sterility, the cruelty, and the uselessness of everything he had bought. "Get out," Kunle spat. "Take your damn needles, your tasteless pap, and your miserable diagnoses and get out of my house. You're all fired. This is madness, doctor," Okoro cried, picking up his briefcase, offended. "Without our expert care, your mother won't last a month." "With your expert care, my mother has been dead for 5 years," Kunle replied with a cutting coldness that left no room for retort. "Get out of here. If you're not on the street in 3 minutes, I'll call security to have you thrown out forcibly." The doctor and nurses did not wait for a second warning. They left the room in a hurry, muttering indignantly. The slamming door echoed in the room, followed by a heavy, tense silence. Kunle was left alone with his mother. Mama Sade continued to cry in bed, trembling uncontrollably, whispering Moremi's name again and again between broken sobs. The businessman, the man who believed he could buy peace of mind with 9-figure checkers, fell to his knees beside the bed. The crushing weight of his guilt shattered his bones. He tried to touch his mother's hand, but she flinched, shying away from his touch, looking at him with a deep terror that hurt Kunle more than a stab wound. He couldn't calm her. He didn't know how. He was just the repentant executioner, but the damage was already done. He looked at the floor where the green pap stained the walls and the syringe lay abandoned. He remembered Amaka's terrified gaze the night before in the storm. He remembered her pleading words, "My younger siblings are waiting for me." If I don't bring that money, we'll be thrown onto the street. He had destroyed the only person capable of saving his mother. He himself had thrown away the miracle he had so desperately been seeking. Kunle buried his face in his hands and, for the first time in his adult life, wept with pure despair. He wept for his mother, he wept for his arrogance, and he wept for the urgent and terrifying need to find a young cleaner in a city of 5 million inhabitants. The diary in the staff quarters. The silence that fell upon the immense mansion after the abrupt departure of the medical team was sepulchral, a vacuum so heavy it seemed to crush the oxygen. In the luxurious, silk-walled room, Mama Sade had finally stopped screaming. The physical and emotional exhaustion had been so extreme that her fragile body simply shut down, surrendering to a restless sleep filled with sporadic tremors. There was no need to inject the sedative poison that Dr. Okoro intended to use to erase her consciousness. All it took was for the terror to disappear from her sight. Kunle Adeyemi remained on his knees beside the immense clinical bed for what seemed like hours, unable to utter a single word, his breathing ragged and his eyes fixed on his mother's pale, tear-streaked face. Guilt was a living beast devouring his insides. He had been on the verge of allowing them to shut down the brain of the woman who gave him life, all because of his absurd obstinacy in maintaining a clinical protocol that served absolutely no purpose other than to feed his own illusion of control. He had expelled the only person who had managed to make her smile in 5 bloody years. He had cast Amaka out into the storm without a kobo, humiliating her and threatening to destroy her. Suddenly, a brutal urgency, an almost animal desperation, seized the businessman. He had to find her. He had to repair the catastrophic damage his arrogance had caused. Kunle sprang to his feet, wiping his damp face with the sleeves of his expensive dark suit, now wrinkled and shapeless. He left his mother's room, making sure to leave the door ajar to hear her breathing, and ran down the marble hallway with a haste bordering on panic. His heavy shoes echoed like hammer blows in the house's sepulchral silence. He descended the immense main staircase, skipping steps 2 at a time, ignoring the dizziness and fatigue of not having slept all night. He reached the ground floor and strode through the immaculate kitchen, pushing open the swinging door that connected to the laundry area and the internal staff quarters. The temperature here was noticeably colder. It was an area of the house Kunle never set foot in, an invisible world designed for employees to enter and exit without disrupting the mansion's glass and luxury aesthetic. He stopped in front of the wooden door of the staff quarters that Amaka had occupied for the last month during her strenuous double shifts. He pushed the handle. The door creaked slightly as it opened, revealing a tiny space, barely large enough for a single bed, with coarse sheets, a small metal wardrobe, and a chipboard bedside table. The room was completely dark. The only light came from the small, high window that let in the grayish glow of the cloudy morning. It smelled of damp, cheap cleaning products, and the rain from the previous night. Kunle switched on the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling and felt a pang of shame at the absolute austerity of the place. He slept on imported Egyptian cotton sheets, while the young woman who cared for his mother's soul rested on a sagging mattress that wouldn't even have served his business partner's dogs. Amaka had left almost nothing. Having been dismissed so violently, she had barely had time to grab her small backpack. The metal wardrobe was wide open, revealing its completely empty interior. There were no uniforms, no spare shoes, no personal belongings, nothing. "Think, Kunle, think," he muttered to himself in a hoarse voice, running both hands through his disheveled hair in a gesture of pure desperation. There must be a copy of her ID, a contract, a resume. The employment agency doesn't open until noon. I can't wait that long. I need her address right now. He began to search the small room with frantic movements. He opened the only drawer of the bedside table so hard he almost ripped it off its metal runners empty. He checked under the bed, lifted the worn mattress, raising a cloud of stale dust. He searched behind the door, nothing. Amaka was a ghost who had passed through that house, leaving only the imprint of her kindness, and disappearing without leaving a single bureaucratic trace. Kunle let out a grunt of frustration and punched the wall with a clenched fist, feeling panic threatened to paralyze him. He sank heavily onto the edge of the single bed, burying his face in his hands, breathing erratically. He had lost. He had destroyed his last chance at redemption, and now he couldn't even find the victim of his fury to beg for forgiveness. But then, as he looked up, his gaze fixed on a tiny detail. Between the narrow gap separating the bedside table and the chipped wall, the corner of a rectangular object poked out an object that, by its opaque color and texture, did not belong to the standard decor of the house. Kunle frowned, leaned forward, and slid his long fingers into the slot. His fingertips touched rough cardboard, and he pulled it out slowly. What he retrieved from that dark corner was neither a resume nor an official identification document. It was a cheap notebook, a spiral-bound exercise book with a dark blue cardboard cover, visibly worn from constant friction. The corners were bent, some pages stuck out unevenly, and the cover had small stains that looked like coffee or perhaps dried tears. It was the most insignificant and humble object Kunle had held in his hands in his entire adult life. He turned it over slowly, feeling a strange reverence. In the center of the blue cover, written in round, simple handwriting with a black ink pen, was a title that made him stop dead. His heart gave a painful lurch in his chest. It didn't say cleaning notes. It didn't say shift, schedule. The notebook was titled, Things That Make My Mama Sade Smile. The weight of gold. Kunle Adeyemi felt the air freeze in his lungs. His fingers, accustomed to signing Millionaire contracts and holding designer crystal glasses, trembled visibly as he held that cheap cardboard notebook. The sound of the wind hitting the small window of the staff quarters seemed to have vanished from the entire universe in that precise and devastating instant. Only he and that worn piece of paper existed. With agonizing slowness, as if he were about to defuse a bomb that could shatter him into 1,000 pieces, Kunle opened the first page. Amaka's handwriting filled each line with meticulous order. There were no crossouts. It was an intimate, detailed, and deeply painful record, written by someone who had decided to observe the soul of a sick, elderly woman when everyone else only saw a defective body. The first date corresponded to Amaka's first week of work. Kunle read aloud, his throat constricted in an unbearable knot. Today, Dr. Okoro yelled at Mama Sada because she wouldn't swallow the blue pill. He said it was neurological aggression. I stayed cleaning near the window and looked into her eyes. It wasn't aggression, it was pure terror. The doctor smells of clinical alcohol and wears a cold metal watch that scratches her skin when he takes her pulse. Mama Sade doesn't hate medicine. She hates feeling like a piece of meat in an abattoir. When the doctor left, I secretly made her chamomile tea. I let it cool and gave it to her in a floral porcelain cup. I told her it was Baba Segun's secret recipe. She drank it all to the last drop and gave me her first smile. She doesn't need sedatives. She needs to be treated like a human being. A single heavy burning tear escaped Kunle's right eye and fell directly onto the word abattoir, slightly blurring the black ink. The businessman brought a trembling hand to his mouth, trying to stifle the moan of pain that threatened to tear his throat. He paid Dr. Okoro and 5 million weekly to torture his mother. And this girl, earning a pittance of a salary, had discovered the problem in 3 days just by observing a cold metal watch and preparing chamomile tea. He turned the page urgently, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs with destructive force. He needed to read more. He needed to understand the immensity of his own failure. The next entry was dated 2 weeks ago. Mr. Adeyemi visited today. He came into the room, asked the nurses about her blood pressure levels, checked his watch, and left in less than 4 minutes. He didn't touch her. He didn't kiss her. Mama Sade kept looking at the empty door for 2 whole hours. She cried silently, clutching the bedspread. When I approached to wipe her tears, she looked at me with such sadness that my heart felt like it was breaking in two. She told me, "My son doesn't love me, Amaka. I am a nuisance who costs a lot of money." I stroked her hair and had to lie to her to save what little hope she had left. I told her, "Mr. Kunle works from dawn till dusk to buy you the stars, Mama, because you are the most important thing in his life." She closed her eyes and whispered to me, "I don't want the stars. I just want him to sit on my bed and hug me, even if I forget his name." The sound that escaped Kunle's lips was not a sob, it was a muffled howl of pure agony. The man of iron, the titan of finance, completely collapsed. The notebook slipped from his hands and fell to the floor as he hunched over the miserable mattress, clutching his stomach, rocking back and forth in the most absolute and wretched emotional darkness. The revelation was a brutal blow, a hammer shattering the armored glass of his arrogance. Everything he had believed for the past 5 years was a colossal lie. He had built a financial empire, believing that money was the answer to the tragedy of his father's death and the onset of Alzheimer's. He had armored his heart, convincing himself that keeping Mama Sade alive in a sterile cage with the best machines and the most expensive doctors in the country was the supreme act of love. He thought his emotional distance was a sign of strength, that protecting himself from the pain of seeing his mother deteriorate was necessary to keep paying the bills. But the diary of that humble young woman, written with minor spelling errors and full of coffee stains, contained more wisdom, more science, and more love than all the medical records in the world combined. Amaka Eze was not a cleaner who broke the rules. She was the only person in that glass house who was fighting to keep Mama Sade's soul alive, while he, the perfect son, was busy killing her alive with his terrifying coldness. Kunle knelt on the staff quarters floor, not caring that dust soiled his knees, and picked up the notebook with trembling hands, treating it as if it were the most valuable sacred relic on the face of the earth. He opened it to the last pages, desperately searching for something more, a final sign, the climax of the tragedy he himself had orchestrated. The final entry was written in hurried handwriting, with strong strokes that denoted intense emotion. It was dated the previous day, hours before he faked his trip to London to catch her in his cowardly trap. Mama Sad hasn't eaten the green pap for 3 days. The doctors say it's defiance. I know it's not. The green color of the pap is the same color as the walls of the emergency room, where her daughter Moremi passed away 22 years ago. Alzheimer's erases her present, but it stabs the traumas of the past into her chest like sharp knives. Forcing her to eat that is forcing her to relive her child's death with every bite. I can't bear to see her suffer like this. Today I'm going to break the diet, no matter the cost. I'm going to bring her a pepperoni pizza. It's junk food, I know, but Mama Sade once told me it was what they ate on Fridays when their family was complete and happy. If Mr. Adeyemi discovers me, I know he'll fire me. I know he is a cruel man, an ice-cold man whose heart is locked under 1,000 padlocks. I'm afraid of what he might do to me because my younger siblings need me, and if I lose my job, we'll be left on the street. But I'd rather face the fury of that soulless millionaire than allow Mama Said to spend another day in this white hell. Today my mama will smile, even if it's the last thing I do in this house. The last words were like a shotgun blast directly to the center of Kunle's forehead. I'd rather face the fury of that soulless millionaire. That was the image Amaka had of him, and she hadn't been wrong. He had been an absolute monster. Amaka had risked absolutely everything. Her job, the roof over her younger siblings' heads, her own food security for the simple, pure, and divine act of giving a broken elderly woman 5 minutes of happiness. And how had Kunle repaid that sacred sacrifice? By throwing her onto the street in a torrential storm, shouting in her face, denying her wages, and threatening to legally destroy her. He had left her at the mercy of destitution while he slept on silk sheets. The weight of all his gold, all his millions, his businesses, his armored cars, and his power fell upon his shoulders with crushing force, and he discovered that they were worth absolutely nothing. His entire empire was rubbish compared to the immensity of the heart of the woman he had just destroyed. Forgive me, my God. Kunle sobbed in the agonizing solitude of that empty staff quarters, pressing the blue notebook against his chest with such force that the metal spirals dug into his skin through his designer shirt. Tears burned his face, soaking the cheap cardboard, cleansing 20 years of arrogance, pride, and repressed pain. The ruthless businessman had died in that instant, murdered by the truth enshrined in the pages of a service employee. He remained there on his knees in the dust for 10 long minutes, letting the weeping wash his corrupted soul, accepting the totality of his guilt, embracing the deepest and purest shame he had ever experienced. But pain and guilt were not enough. Repentance without action was just another form of cowardice, and Kunle Adeyemi had been a coward for too long. He lifted his head, his red, swollen, tear-streaked eyes filled with a fierce determination, with a new, burning fire that was not born of pride, but of the most humble desperation. He stood up, automatically brushing the dust from his trousers. He looked at the blue notebook he held in his right hand. He didn't know where Amaka lived. He didn't have her address. He didn't have her phone number, nor her full surname, nor references in that house devoid of humanity. Lagos was an asphalt monster, with 20 million inhabitants, an infinite labyrinth where a poor, resourceful young woman could disappear forever in a matter of hours. But Kunle swore in silence, clenching his jaw with iron conviction, that he would turn over every stone on every street in the city if necessary. He would burn his entire fortune, empty his bank accounts, put every private detective in the country to find her. He didn't care about the cost. He didn't care about the time. He was going to find Amaka Eze, and when he found her, he would not present himself as the great Mr. Adeyemi, the arrogant boss who demanded respect and dictated absurd clinical rules. He was going to present himself as the repentant son who did not deserve the miracle she had given his mother. He was going to kneel before her amidst the misery of her reality and beg her to teach him how to love again. He ran out of the staff quarters, rushed through the house like a hurricane, and crossed the armored glass main door, facing the storm that still lashed the city, ready to descend into hell, to search for the woman who held the key to his mother's heaven. The search in the mud. The engine of the enormous black SUV roared with a ferocity that made the mansion's windows tremble. Kunle Adeyemi accelerated hard, tearing up the immaculate lawn of the driveway, while the storm lashed the windshield with merciless violence. His hands, gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel, trembled uncontrollably. Beside him, in the passenger seat, rested the cheap cardboard blue notebook, the compass that had just shattered his world of lies and now pointed him to the only path to salvation. He didn't have the exact address, but he had the power of an empire at his disposal. Through the car's hands-free system, he called his HR director. It was 10 a.m. on a Saturday, but Kunle accepted no excuses. In a broken, hoarse voice, laden with a life-or-death urgency, he ordered her to trace the records of the cleaning outsourcing agency. He threatened to fire the entire board of directors if he didn't have Amaka Easy's exact coordinates on his GPS in 10 minutes. 9 minutes later, the dashboard screen lit up with a red dot. The destination was almost 20 kilometers away in one of the most marginalized, poor, and forgotten informal settlements on the outskirts of Lagos, a place where asphalt did not exist, where streets turned into rivers of brown mud every time the sky wept, and where houses were built with unpainted gray blocks, corrugated iron roofs, and broken hopes. As Kunle drove away from his bubble of glass and luxury, the urban landscape became increasingly bleak. Rain fell in torrents, flooding the undrained streets. The armored SUV, a status symbol that cost more than the entire block he was traversing, struggled through enormous potholes and murky puddles. People sheltered under makeshift tarpaulin shelters looked at the vehicle with suspicion. Suddenly, the tires skidded. The dense, slippery mud trapped the front wheels of the heavy SUV in the middle of a steep, unpaved street. The vehicle could not move another inch. The GPS indicated that Amaka's house was 300 meters uphill, down a narrow alley impassable for cars. At any other time in his life, Kunle Adeyemi would have cursed, called a rescue team, and never stepped foot out of his car. But the man inside that vehicle was no longer the untouchable millionaire. He was a desperate son who felt time slipping away like sand through his fingers. He switched off the engine, opened the door, and stepped directly into the storm. The freezing rain soaked him in less than a second. His Italian shoes, polished to perfection, sank almost to his ankles in the thick, malodorous mud. His designer suit, costing thousands of dollars, became drenched and clung to his skin, losing all its form and its false armor. The cold wind lashed him mercilessly, but Kunle did not stop. He walked with difficulty, slipping and stumbling, feeling the mud splash his face and stain his hands. With each step in that mire, his pride crumbled a little more. He was walking the same path Amaka walked every day at dawn to clean the dirt from his glass house. He was feeling firsthand the vulnerability and hardship of the real world, the world he believed he governed from his office on the 40th floor. He reached the end of the alley. Before him was a precarious structure, a wooden door rotten at the base, protected by a small corrugated iron eaves that dripped incessantly. There was no doorbell, no security cameras, just the crudeness of extreme poverty. Kunle raised his fist, trembling with cold and pure terror. Terror that she wouldn't be there. Terror that she wouldn't forgive him. He knocked on the wet wood 3 times. The silence from inside was absolute. Kunle knocked again, this time harder, feeling his heart about to burst in his chest. "Amaka!" he cried, his voice choked by the deafening noise of the rain hitting the corrugated iron roof. "Please, Amaka, open the door." He heard the faint sound of a rusty bolt turning. The door opened a few centimeters, just enough to reveal a pale, terrified face. It was Amaka. She wore a worn sweatshirt and gray tracksuit bottoms. Her right hand was wrapped in a makeshift, blood-stained bandage, the wound she had incurred falling on the broken glass in the dining room. Behind her legs peeked the frightened faces of 2 small children, her younger siblings, who stared at the giant, soaked stranger with wide eyes. Upon recognizing the man outside, Amaka's face transformed into a mask of absolute panic. She instinctively took a step back and tried to close the door, convinced that the millionaire had fulfilled his threat and had come accompanied by the police to take his prey. No, please wait," Kunle pleaded, stopping the door with both hands, staining the wood with the mud from his palms. He didn't use force. His touch was desperate, almost weak. Amaka trembled like a leaf. Tears began to well in her eyes, mixing with despair. "Mr. Adeyemi, I beg you for God's sake, don't report me," Amaka cried, hugging her younger siblings, using her own body as a shield. "We're already packing. They're throwing us out tomorrow. I've already lost my job." I have nothing left to take away. Leave us in peace, please. The young woman's words were the final blow to Kunle's soul. Seeing the pure terror he himself had sown in that girl, seeing the bleeding wound on her hand, seeing the misery of the room behind her, completely broke him. The titan of finance, the man who bowed to no one, lost strength in his legs. The mud splashed loudly as Kunle Adeyemi's knees violently hit the soaked ground. Amaka let out a gasp of surprise, covering her mouth with her good hand. The children's eyes widened. The richest man they had ever seen was kneeling in the putrid mud in front of their humble house in the storm, crying like a lost child. Kunle plunged his hands into the mud, lowered his head, until his forehead almost touched the dirty water in the alley. It was total surrender, the most absolute and beautiful humiliation of his life. Forgive me. Kunle's voice came out as a broken moan, an animal sound laden with deep agony that chilled Amaka's blood. I beg you, Amaka, I beg you on my knees. Forgive me for being a monster. Forgive me for my arrogance, for my blindness, for having hurt you. Amaka couldn't articulate a word. She was paralyzed. Never, in her entire life, had she seen a man of such power humble himself in such a way. With mud-stained hands, trembling violently, Kunle pulled out from under his soaked jacket the object he had protected with his own body throughout the journey. He extended the blue notebook to Amaka, looking up at her. His face was unrecognizable, soaked with rain and tears, his eyes red and pleading. I read it. I read everything, Kunle sobbed, clutching the notebook as if it were his only salvation. You were right in every word. I was killing her, Amaka, and you were the only angel who tried to save her. Amaka looked at the notebook and then at the millionaire's eyes. There was no anger in them now, no ego, only an immense pain and a brutal sincerity that completely disarmed the young woman's fear. The doctors almost sedated her this morning, Kunle continued, his voice choked, water sliding down his hair and falling onto his defeated shoulders. She kept screaming. She was terrified. She only asked for you. She asked for Moremi to come back. I threw them all out. I ran them out of my house, but I don't know how to help her. I don't know how to love her like you do. The house is empty. She's fading, Amaka. She's giving up. Kunle lowered his hands, letting the notebook fall into the mud, and clasped his palms together in front of his chest in a gesture of absolute plea. I'm not here to give you orders. I'm not your boss. I'm a failed son who has come to beg you for his mother's life. Kunle cried, not caring who saw him, not caring about the rain or the dirt. I offer you whatever you want. My money, my house, my entire life. Bring your siblings. Live with us. They will never lack food again. But please, Amaka, I beg you, for the soul of my dead sister, come back to my house, come back to my mother, help me save her. Teach me to be the son she deserves. Don't leave me alone. The rain continued to fall relentlessly. The silence that settled between them was only interrupted by Kunle's choked sobs. Amaka looked at that powerful man, shattered in the mud. She remembered Mama Sade's face lighting up with a piece of pizza. She remembered the promise she had made not to leave her alone. Her heart, which knew no resentment but infinite compassion, ached. Amaka took a step forward, ignoring the rain, knelt in front of Kunle, and with her bandaged hand, gently touched his soaked shoulder. Please stand up, mister. Kunle, Amaka said in a soft, sweet voice, full of a forgiveness he didn't believe he deserved. Let's go home. Mama Sade is waiting for us for lunch. The slice of redemption. Sunday dawned with a clean, bright, and clear sky. The brutal storm that had lashed Lagos the previous afternoon and night had disappeared, leaving in its wake fresh air and a vibrant light that filtered victoriously through the immense glass windows of the Adeyemi mansion. The sterile, cold and silent atmosphere that had dominated the residence for years had completely vanished. There was no longer the smell of hospital disinfectant, nor white uniformed nurses patrolling the hallways with stern faces. There were no stainless steel trays, nor pre-filled syringes with sedatives. Instead, the air of the immense house was permeated with a glorious, warm, and deeply familiar aroma. The aroma of freshly baked dough, seasoned tomato sauce, oregano, and generous melted cheese. In the master bedroom, Mama Sade slowly opened her eyes. She had slept deeply, without nightmares and without sudden awakenings. At first, the usual confusion of Alzheimer's tried to cloud her mind, but then she heard a sound that dispelled the shadows. It was the soft humming of a female voice, an old sweet melody. As she turned her head on the pillow, Mama Sade saw Amaka. The young caregiver wore her impeccable light blue uniform with white trim, and her black hair was pulled back in a perfect bun. Amaka was folding blankets near the window, bathed in sunlight. Mama Sade blinked, feeling an immense warmth fill her chest, and a trembling smile formed on her wrinkled lips. "Moremi, you didn't leave?" the elderly woman whispered, her eyes shining with pure joy. Amaka put down the blankets, approached the bed with a radiant smile, and gently took her hands. "I promised I'd never leave you alone, Mama," Amaka replied, kissing Mama Sade's forehead with absolute devotion. "And I have a surprise for you. It's Pizza Sunday. Get up, put on your favorite yellow blouse, because today we're not eating in the room. Today we're eating at the big table." Half an hour later, the grand, solid oak dining room was the scene of the most beautiful miracle that house had ever witnessed. Natural light, warm and golden, flooded the room, creating an atmosphere of undeniable happiness and care. The scene looked like a perfect photorealistic painting. In the foreground, seated at the head of the timber table, was Mama Sade. Amaka had carefully styled her gray hair, and the elderly woman wore her beautiful, soft, luminous yellow blouse. She had her glasses adjusted, and for the first time in half a decade, her posture was not that of a defeated invalid, but of a complete woman. She was smiling with such genuine, immense happiness that her eyes crinkled behind her glasses. Beside her, leaning with a protective warmth that radiated love in every movement, was Amaka. With an expert and careful hand, the young caregiver with a giant heart was using a spatula to serve an enormous and succulent slice of pepperoni pizza. The melted mozzarella cheese, golden at the edges, stretched into perfect, elastic steaming strands from the edge of the cardboard box to Mama Sade's fine porcelain plate. On the table were no pill dispensers nor green purees. There were 2 gigantic pizzas, one of them half-cut, crystal glasses overflowing with fresh water, and paper napkins. It was a simple feast, brimming with fat, calories, and sodium, but infinitely more healing than all the therapies of the most expensive neurologists in the city. However, the most monumental and astonishing change in that photorealistic scene was not in the food or the elderly woman's smile. It was in the background of the room. In the doorway connecting the dining room to the hallway, there was no longer the businessman in the dark suit, briefcase in hand, hidden in the shadows, watching with wide eyes and open mouth from shock. That specter of the past had disappeared forever. Kunle Adeyemi was no longer a spectator in the shadows of his own life. The millionaire was there in the full sunlight. He had discarded his designer jacket, torn off his silk tie, and had the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows. And for the first time in 20 years, Kunle was seated at the table. He was sitting right next to his mother, holding his own slice of pizza in his hand. His eyes, though still bearing the shadow of the previous night's tears, shone with an overwhelming peace. He watched Mama Sade with absolute devotion, admiring every wrinkle on her smiling face as if it were the greatest treasure in the universe. Amaka finished serving the portion of stretchy cheese onto Mama Sade's plate and winked at Kunle. The businessman returned a smile filled with eternal gratitude. In the garden behind, the childish laughter of Amaka's 2 younger siblings could be heard as they ran across the lawn chasing butterflies, filling the mansion with a life that money could never buy. Mama Sade took the slice of pizza with both hands. The cheese stained her fingers, but no one cared. She took a big bite and closed her eyes, letting out a sigh of infinite pleasure that made the hearts of those present vibrate. Opening her eyes, Mama Sade turned her head and looked directly at Kunle. The fog of Alzheimer's would always be there, lurking, stealing names and dates, confusing pasts and presents. But the love Amaka had taught Kunle to show that love was invulnerable to the disease. Mama Sade looked at the handsome man in the white shirt sitting beside her. Perhaps in that precise millisecond, she didn't remember exactly that he owned a financial empire. Perhaps she didn't remember his exact age or his university degrees. But Mama Sade smiled, extended her cheese-stained hand, and caressed Kunle's cheek with infinite tenderness. "It's delicious, my mischievous boy," Mama Sade whispered, her eyes full of light. "Eat slowly, Kunle. There's enough for everyone." Kunle felt the whole world stop. The air left his lungs, and a tear of pure, hot, healing happiness rolled down his face to his mother's hand. She had called him by his name. After so many years of darkness, she had recognized him. Not because of the doctors, not because of the pills, but because for the first time, he was truly there. "Yes, Mama," Kunle replied, his voice trembling with emotion, taking a bite of his pizza, savoring the best moment of his entire existence. "There's enough for everyone. I love you, Mama. I love you very much." In that light-filled dining room, amidst the aroma of melted cheese and the laughter of a recovered mother, the businessman understood that he had been the poorest man in the world until the night he knelt in the mud. Because in the end, true wealth is not kept in armored glass strongboxes, but in the ability to sit at the table, share bread, and remember, before time runs out, how to love those who gave us life.